starting discussing Sifta Zayin, which I mentioned at the end of the last shir, which is a shir for its own, just on this Sa'if. And again, this shir is also Schus Menachem Mendel ben Adol Miriam, who is serving in the Israeli army, that him and all the other soldiers should come back safe and sound and succeed in their mission. Sif Yudal and Tezvav, which we discussed in the previous shir, discusses opening a window across the street, across the Rosh Hashanah to the house of your friend, and there's no windows at that house yet. And after we finish discussing that, the Mechaber is discussing now in this Siman, in this Sa'if, someone who opens a window to a chatzar of his friend in a way that today there is no hezek. And there's different categories in this, and it has a lot different implications for practical halacha today regarding doing something which will cause damage at some point towards some place which is planned to have something there. Which means we're talking about a chatzar or a chatzar which is a churva, which is going to be rebuilt. So right now there's no hezek. Right now there is no hezek, but since it's being to be rebuilt, and we're going to later see, stam churva is made to be rebuilt. So therefore, when you have such a situation, so there's going to be a hezek down the line. The question is, right now, what can you do and what can't you do? Doing something which right now is not causing a hezek, and down the line will definitely cause a hezek to somebody else. Are you allowed to do it? Are you not allowed to do it? Is there a chazakah? Is there a chazakah over here, or there is no chazakah over here, etc. The Mechaber starts with the shita of the Rosh, and the Rosh, you could, Lashita say in the previous ifim also, in previous places also, he brings a couple of examples. The first example the Rosh brings is if one person has a chatzir, which is a churva today, and the other person goes and opens a window towards that churva. Right now there is no hezek re'iyah, but in the future there will definitely be a hezek re'iyah. The Baal HaChatzir cannot come and say, do not do it, because in the future I'm going to build a chatzir over here, and it's going to cause me damage down the line. Right? Why is that? Because the Rosh says, the rule that we have across the board when it comes to hezek is if somebody blocks it. So right now, the person, the Baal HaChatzir, is loy chaser because there's no hezek. The Baal HaChaloin is nehene, and therefore there is no issue whatsoever in opening it. And therefore you cannot be me'akev him. The Rosh also puts a klal, being that you cannot be me'akev him, you also cannot make a chazakah on this property, on this window, unless he's going to be able to prove that he had a chazakah before the chatzir became a churva, and therefore he's able to keep the chazakah going afterwards. There's one of the Achronim which discusses if somebody has a tree which is blocking the hezek. Someone has a window, it's not directly connected to Sif, but someone has a window, and in front of the window he has a tree, and therefore the shachen doesn't have an issue with it, and then comes a storm and knocks out the tree. So now the hezek happened not because of anybody's specific action, but what the insurance companies call an act of God. So the tree came off, and now there is a hezek. And now they're going to say, I want you to block your window. So over there, I forgot which of the Achronim say it, but it discusses over there that if he can prove that he had a chazakah for this window before the tree went up. Anyways, over here, according to the Rosh, being that you cannot be moicha, the other one cannot be moicha against you, b'meila you cannot be machzik against him that property, and therefore when the churva will be rebuilt, the Baal HaChurva could come and tell you, go block your window, or he could build in his property without doing the required archaka of Dalad Amis, which you need around a window. That's the first case that the Rosh mentioned. The second case that the Rosh brings is all quoted in the Mechaber and the Sa'if. Just going through them quickly. One that had a aliyah facing a chatzer, a churva, and he extended his aliyah, and he also opened his aliyah is facing the other person's aliyah. He extended it. He put a window over there for the purpose of light, and then the person across from him did not yet open up a window, and then the second one wants to go and open up a window over there, and Reuven comes and says, "Hey, I need it for the light. You cannot block me. You cannot open it." So the new person, according to the Rosh, the second one still has a right. Why? Because being that it's minhag hamokaim to each one to open their windows, this becomes like a chatzer hashutfim. And what the first person did was shaloi kedin, to do it, Lu Yitzuda would be a window over there. The other person would do it, and therefore, since the other person was not being moiche, the only reason he was not being moiche is because it didn't bother him, but now that he wants to do something, it is bothering him. So therefore, he was not moiche. He was not moiche, and he was not me'akev. But being that he cannot be me'akev, he also cannot, the first one cannot be machzik, and therefore the second one can build and can block and do whatever he has to do. And the third case that the Rosh brings is somebody who has a house with an overhang of a roof, and the overhang is blocking his windows, and the first one went and opened the window that's facing the overhang, and therefore there is no hezek re'iyah, and then the overhang was taken off, and there's no more overhang that there was until before, so it became a hezek re'iyah at that moment that he could go and look into his friend's chatzer. At that point, the Baal HaChatzer could go and tell him, block your windows. But until that moment, he cannot be ma'akevim, and then since he cannot be ma'akevim, the first one cannot be machzik either. And therefore, the Mechaber continues, according to the Rosh, if one person has a window which is high up, and that window has hezek re'iyah, has potential hezek re'iyah, and he was machzik, and the other person now comes, the person across wants to come and block it, build and block it, and therefore he's going to block the hezek re'iyah which was until then. The owner of the window could come and say, don't do it. Why? Because one day I'm not letting you do it. Why? Because one day your building is going to collapse. And then you're going to come and you're going to say that I have no chazaka on my window which I had before. You can come to me with a taina to block my window which I already had before. And at that point I will not have any edim to prove my point. So now, what's the Rosh? That's the Rosh Shitta in short. You cannot be me'akev somebody from doing something which right now is not causing any damage. At the same time, being that you cannot be me'akev, you also cannot make it, the first one cannot make a chazakah. And basically, I'm not causing you damage. Now you have no right to block me. Now I can do whatever I want now. And therefore, being that I do whatever I want without regard for future damages, and knowing that down the line there might be damages, I understand that I cannot make a chazakah on this very simple reason. A chazakah could only be done when the other person recognizes the damage that he's going to have from it. And over here, there is no damage that the second person could recognize. Since the second person cannot recognize the damage, therefore there is no chazakah, and there's going to be a damage down the line. That's not enough of a reason for me to be able to block you from doing something right now, because down the line there's going to be damage, because right now I am not chaser and you are nehene, therefore I cannot block you. And the fact that you were not moiche is not enough either to make a chazakah, because I don't have to be moiche on something which is not causing me damage. My mecha is all intertwined together. The reason I could block you is because it's causing me damage. The reason I can make a mecha is because it's causing me damage. If it's not causing me damage, I cannot make a mecha, I cannot block you, and therefore, since I cannot make a mecha right now, you cannot make a chazaka. It's all intertwined. There's another Yehuda, Tanina Erechaim Siman Tazayin, which he explains in between the discussion over there, that the Rosh holds that if it is a window which was open for the purpose of light, then he is machzik, even according to the Rosh. Why? Because in Seif Yud we learned that the dinim of a window that's made for light is different than a window which the purpose of it could be hezek, yeah? And over there, even by a small window, the din is that the small window that you can't make a mecha, the din is that you are machzik. So over here, the same thing would apply over here. You can't make a mecha because it's not causing damage. Just like by a small window, you also don't make a mecha, and you still could be machzik when it's chalain la'ira. So the Yehuda says, based on that, the Rosh will hold that if you open the window towards a chatzer chareva, and the purpose of the window was la'ira, the Rosh would hold that you could make a mecha.
What is it by a small window? You're not able to make a small window?
If you make a small window, the other person is not moicha. We learned in Seif Yud, and he's still, if it's la'ira, by a chaloin, by a small window, the person is still machzik, even though the other person was not moicha, because you can't stick your head out for hezekriya, because it was for ira, you could, even though there's no mecha, you could be machzik. So over here also, if it's a big window la'ira, being that there is no hezekriya now, so even though the other person has no right to be moicha, you could be machzik. So therefore, he should know that if it's a chaloin la'ira, he should make a mecha, technically, to be able to block this chaloin la'ira. And the logic of the Noida Yehuda could be explained as follows. The yesoid of a chazaka in hezek re'iyah, it's dependent not on what you do, but on the lack of mecha of the other person. The other person is the one who's being nizrik. If the person is not moicha, then he's allowing you to cause him damage, and by him allowing you to cause him damage, you create a chazaka on that, and the chazaka is right away because you know the damage happens right away. That is when there is a hezek. But when it comes to ira, there is no hezek to the other person, whether it's a small window above or whether it is a big window. The other person is not getting damaged anyways. The purpose of the window is la'ira. It's not for hezekriya. The person is not getting damaged whether you do it one way or the other. So therefore, he cannot be moicha. He can't be moicha because he's not being damaged. Not only is he not moicha, the fact that he's not doing anything about it, even though potentially there is a hezekriya, is because he understands that it's for the purpose of light, and his mechila is for that. He was moichel that you should have a right to use your light. So when it comes to ira, the chazaka is not dependent on a lack of mecha, because the mecha will anyways not happen. But the chazaka is dependent on the understanding of the other person that you have a need for light, and therefore, since you have a need for light, you also have a place where you could. I'm allowing you to do this window for the purpose of light, and I'm giving you the rights to do it, and therefore you are machzik for that purpose, for the purpose of light. So here, where there is a churva, that there is no hezek re'iyah, but the purpose of the window is la'ira, and the person knows that la'ira is not the same as hezek re'iyah, by him not doing anything to tell you, I am against your oira being there, he was moichel the oira, he was not moichel nezakim, because he was not moichel nezek because there's no nezek. All he was moichel was oira. Since he was moichel for the oira, that mechila stays forever because you always need the oira, as opposed to mechila for nezakim, which only applies when there are nezakim. Similarly to the Noida Yehuda, the same is paskened also in Shas Hashuvas Beis Shloimeh, Mishpat, Siman Gimel, Siman Daled, that if a window is made la'ira, then you are machzik even if you open to a churva. Same thing is in Minchas Pitim to Rav Meir Arik, which is over here on Sa'if, in Sa'if Katan Yud Ches. Now, according to the Rosh, you could be koif for the other person to block it afterwards, when time comes. Why is that? There's a problem over here with following this logic of the Rosh. The Rosh holds later on that if you're soymech nezakim, gefes, or whatever it is next to the other person's property, if the first one was soymech beheter, you don't have to be marchik your nezek afterwards when the nezek occurs. So Rabbi Kiva Eiger in his Kuntas Milad Nazikin holds that there's a difference between if a hezek is caused directly by your hands, you're the one that's doing the hezek, then the Rosh holds that smicha rishayna beheter doesn't help forever. It only helps until you start doing actual hezek. So by over here, it's not that the hezek was coming b'meila like putting the gefes over there. Over here the hezek is that hezek re'iyah actually did not happen until that moment. When did hezek re'iyah begin? A hezek re'iyah is a constant hezek which starts every morning. Every morning you wake up, I'm paraphrasing that of Kiva Eiger, every morning you wake up, you look out the window, you're creating a new hezek. So therefore, it's such a hezek, that's what the Rosh holds, that even though samach beheter, and other places by gefes, you will not have to be, you won't have to move it to samach beheter, but over here, you do have the Rosh will hold, that's why you could block it, because the hezek is nischadesh, chadesh betuv v'cholim tomid, nischadesh every day. That's how Rabbi Kiva Eiger explains why you, according to the Rosh, you could be koife him.
Where's that in this house every day?
Hezek re'iyah. After, over here, when the window is opened and later there's a churva being built, according to the Rosh, once the churva is built, you could demand to block the window. This is Tiferes Shmuel, Siman Kuf Nun Hey, Sa'if Mem Vav. He explains differently that there is a difference between samach rishoyna by nazikim that you cannot tell him to stop it, and over here with a window that you could tell him to stop it. Depends on the logic of the Rosh over here. The Rosh over here says that the reason why you're allowed to lachatchila do it is because that's the reason. That's what it says clearly. The reason is because so the moment the other person is chaser, the whole heter goes out the window. So therefore, over here, you were only your whole heter is based on the logic of chaser. Right now, I'm nene and you're not chaser. The moment the chaser kicks in, there's no more zenene. But by saimech nazikim, I'm not nene from you. It's not zenene from somebody else for zeli chaser. I'm doing it in my own property. I'm not putting the gefes and the other things in your property. I'm putting it in my property. And it's going to cause you damage. So there's no zenene for zeli chaser. I'm not being nene from your property. When I'm opening a window to your chaser, I'm being nene from your avir. So then over there, the whole logic is nene zeli chaser. Once the chaser kicks in, the heter goes by the wayside. But by samach beheter, the first moment there is no. I'm doing it in my own property. Later, I'm still doing it in my own property. Therefore, the Rosh holds that over there you could keep your chazakah, for it. So that's the difference between that's the two explanations for the Rosh. And afkemina between the Rabbi Kiva Eiger and the Tiferes Shmuel would be in a situation when when he opened the window, he pulled back 4 amas. So yes, he opened the window facing his friend's chatzir, but he pulled back the 4 amas. Therefore, if he pulled back 4 amas, it means the way he opened the window is sometimes you have he made like a 4 amas square inside. He pulled back his window 4 amas. So now, according to talking about Shitas Rosh, so if it's mitzad zenev zelachaser according to Tiferes Shmuel, so it's not nana from his friend's avir, never was. Therefore, when the time will come, the other person will rebuild his chatzir. He will not have to do anything. He doesn't have to block his window. According to Rabbi Akiva, Eiger would still have to block his window. Why? Because the heter is not because of the chaser. The heter is Because whether you're creating a constant hezek, and now when you pull it back 4 amas, you're still creating the constant hezek when you're opening it up to his window if you have a direct line of view to his window. Another nafkamina, which is more common in today's day and age, let's say there's a property, a building with a bunch of people, or a chotzer that has a bunch of houses, and somebody goes and makes illegal construction in its own property. And now someone down the line is going to want to build also and do his own legal extension with permits. And then the inspectors are going to come and they're going to see that this person did a whole extension without permits. And what is the government going to tell you? Go and we cannot approve any further construction on this building or on this property until you take off or you correct all the damages that were done before. And who did the damages? That person who is over there, but he did it b'shaloi. And therefore, there's a hezek that happens down the line. So now, according to the Rosh, am I allowed to do something now which is going to definitely cause a hezek down the line? Because every person who has a small apartment is going to want, especially at Yisrael, is going to want to extend his porches out, as everybody knows. So according to Rabbi Kiva, that it makes no difference if it's in your own rishus or it's nene from other person's rishus. It will still be usher. You could block him from now. You'd be able to force him afterwards to do it. And the hazak is there. But according to the Tiferet Shmuel, if I'm doing it in my own property, tough luck, you can't do anything about it. I'm not nene from Chavera.
The fact that the other person can't build is considered a hazak of war.
Yeah, he's stuck.
Even if it's hezek, not the case of the building, but let's say before, the nafkamina, when it's hezek re'iyah, according to the Tiferet Shmuel, since it's in my own rishus, that's it, it's no longer hezek re'iyah?
According to the shitas harosh, he says that the shitas harosh, because the Rosh says because he says not because he says so only the Rosh says that be'etzim, I'm allowed to do whatever I want if I'm not causing you damage now. The Yisrael of Tiferet Shmuel is, according to the Rosh, you're allowed to do whatever you want if I'm not causing damage right now. Why am I allowed to? That's the shit of the Rosh. So why is this example, Yoitzim in a klal, that you could force the guy to break his window? Because he was nana from your avir. But if there's no hanoah from your own property, then no.
Even if he's being mazik.
He's being mazik. Because I'm allowed to do something now which I'm not being mazik you now. Even though down the line I will be mazik you. That's the Rosh. That's how he holds.
So hezek re'iyah is kind of that loophole, because the point is, you can't be meicha now, but you could be meicha later when the hezek will happen, generally. So that's what I should say. He won't be mazik because you can't be meicha, and then when the time comes, he'll...
Yeah, but the Rosh doesn't say because it's down the line. The Rosh says because then it's the lechaser. That's the lashon of the Rosh in the mechaber.
That's why you can do it now. You can't tell him don't do it now because in 5 years I want to.
Right. So the Tiferet Shmuel is medayek from it. That means that you're allowed to do it. The only reason why you could block it down the line, because it's zenana is a lechaser, because it becomes a chaser. Otherwise, there's no zenana. There's no issue.
Down the line to get rid of the thing.
That's the whole question. If you could do mecha on something that you don't really have to do mecha on. Separate discussion on that.
No, hey, when he wants to get it from the government, you could force the other guy to break his chutzpah between the chutzpah.
That's a shaila or not? According to the first Shmuel, no. According to the Kiva, yeah.
According to Kiva, you can tell him not to do it.
No, according to the Kiva, you can't. According to Kiva, the way he explains the Rosh, the whole machlekes in the Rosh and everybody else is not what's going to happen down the line, is what happens right now. According to the Rosh, you can't be meicha now. He can't stop him from doing illegal construction now. Even if it's going to cause damage down the line. The only difference is, what am I going to be able to do down the line? Now, we did mention that if a person wants to build, in the second and over there it says if someone opens a window, then that the Rosh says you're allowed to do it, that you don't have to be, that the other person doesn't have to be marchik at all. He could build over there. The Be'er HaGoyla on the side adds something very interesting. Quotes from the Rosh, not only is he allowed to, mitzvah to tell the second one that you don't have to back off, that you could block his window and you could build as much as you want. Why? Because Hashavas Aveda. That's how he puts it. It's a better girl says, ah?
The Torah also mentions that about
Two next to each other. Yeah, so here, the better girl puts it on the side. On this one, that you could, instead of Shabbos Avedi, you could tell him, you have built to the property line. Don't even worry about it. Now, the first case that we mentioned happens to be the second case in the Mechaber, that about the window, that he opens the window towards the Chotzer HaChareva, that down the line, according to Rosh, is going to have to block it. And the Sivas HaMishpat of Yosef Kotten to Zayin asks a question. How could it be that you cannot be Moiche? Why shouldn't you be able to be Moiche? We have a chashash that's maybe the Baal HaChurva is going to say, I want to be Moiche now, because down the line, the Baal HaChalon is going to come and going to say, I had a chazakah beforehand, before you started building, I had a chazakah, and my chalon, and he's going to claim that his chalon was before the churva, and then Baal HaChotzer is not going to be Ne'eman. Why? Because Baal HaChalon is going to be considered the muhzak, like it says later in Sifrit Ches. And therefore, why can't he block him now based on the issue that he's going to have down the line? So that's the question in the Sivus. Taka the Taz asked that question in Sifrit Ches. He says, what's the difference between here and Sifrit Ches? And he says that over here, being that the Baal HaChalon is going to claim that, being over here, Baal HaChalon is claiming a chazakah on the heir of his friend's chatzar. So therefore, he wants to be moitzi from his friend, the avir of his chatzar. Therefore, he's the one who has to bring a raya. And Baal HaChotzer is a Morakama, is a Cheskas Morakama. However, that's what the Taz's explanation, but the Taz doesn't really answer the question of the Nesivis that Soif, if the Baal HaChotzer is not going to have Eidim that he's a Morakama, he's going to lose. So why can't he be Me'akev? So if you look in the Avnei Choshen, the way he explains it, this whole question doesn't begin. Not the question of the Taz, not the question of the Nesivis. He says, over here, what are we talking about in this Siman? We're talking about that there is no Hezek Riyah. If there is no Hezek Riyah, the Baal HaChalon can't claim Chazakah. To begin with. There's no Hezek Riyah now, the Baal HaChalon can't claim Chazakah. So, how could such a question, inside the Sivas, inside the Taz, they can't compare the two. They're asking from a case where there is Hezek Riyah and B'meila, a person could claim Chazakah. If there's no Hezek Riyah to begin with, there's no Chazakah either. So the Baal HaChalon will never be able to claim Chazakah. So B'meila, he doesn't have to worry about the fact that down the line he's going to claim that he was Machzik. There's no Chazakah, according to the Rosh. Because the whole ne'emanis of somebody to say that he was Koidim is when there is Hezek Riyah. Then he could claim, the Sifrit Ches, he could do it, he could claim Chazakah. But over here he doesn't have it, Meikari doesn't have a Chazakah. So what claim could he have? So that's why he says that this whole question doesn't even begin, the whole question of the Taz, not the Sivas HaMishpat, and it's all good, and both Seifim could stay the way they are, and you don't have to worry about any status between the two. It's Avnei Choshen explains.
Anybody that wants to just build a house next to someone else's house and tell them to close the windows because he's never massive.
What?
So we figure out anyone that wants
Avnei Choshen, yeah? The Avnei Milum is an Avnei Ezer. What? This is Avnei Choshen. The Avnei Milum is an Avnei Ezer.
You could, anybody that wants, could just build a house next to someone else's house and make him stop all windows.
Why?
Because when he had the windows open, there was nothing to do. Now there is.
No, we were talking about there's already a churva and he's opening and everybody knows what's going on. Here's all the shit of the Rosh. The Mechaber continues and says that the Rashba disagrees with the Rosh. And the Rashba holds that somebody wants to open a chaloin on a churva, and Baal HaChurva will want to open up down the line. He could be Ma'akev. Why? Because he could tell him, I don't want to go down to Bezdin and knock myself out with you later. And even if he's going to tell him, I'm going to write for your star, don't worry about it, still, the Baal HaChurva could still say, I'm not interested in having the shtaris in my house that I have to watch that no mice is going to do it or no floods are going to take it. I'm still going to have to deal with you in the Torah, and that is enough of a reason why I could be moiche and me'akev on you right away. And then the Sivas HaMishpat and Sivkot Yudzayin explains, even though that in the other Nizakim, the second one, the first one could be Saimach Beheter, and the second one cannot say, I don't want you to do it because down the line I'm going to have to go with you to Adon Torah. Over here, that Taina is valid according to the Rashba, because over there he's doing Beshaloi, and therefore, like we said before, over here is Nanem Avil Chaveroi. And if not for Midas Doim, we would block him from doing it. The only reason we allow him to do it Nanem Avil Chaveroi because then there's a Chaser which is Midas Doim. And only when he's not Chaser, the Svara which is allowed to. And therefore we say that being that in the future he's going to have to go to the Torah with him to prove this, that's a big Chaser. So there is a Chaser going to happen. And even if he's going to close the window after the Din Torah, still, so he's not going to be Chaser anymore mitzad hezek riyeh. The mere fact that you have to go to Din Torah is already a Chaser. And therefore he explains, and Nesivos over here explains that according to the Rashba, if you open, this is the Nesivos before he saw the Chuvas of the Rashba, just like in the previous Ifim, that it looks like the Nesivos saw the Rashba only after he finished the Sefer, because in the Sefer Savyad he goes back, certain svaras he puts on the Rashba, he then changes them back because he saw the Chuvas of the Rashba Sefer Keret. So over here in this Nesivos of Kotten Yedzayin he explains that therefore according to the Rashba, if somebody's open, if he opens towards the Reshus Harabim, not directly towards the Chorva, that then he's not Nenem Avir Chaveroi from his friend's Avir, it's Mutter, and he can't claim, this claim is going to have to go to the Torah with him. However, in the square brackets, which he brings from Ksav Yad, he says that the Rashba himself in Siman Elef Kuf Mem Daled says that even when somebody does in his own property, if it's something which down the line he's going to have to remove from his own property, the second person could be me'akev from doing it. The Nesivos says that that's the same thing, that this concept, not like the Rashba, not what he explains originally, the way he originally explains the Rashba, that opening to the Reshus Harabim is not a problem because it's not Nene. He says that's how it brings in the Nimuki Yosef. Happens to be, if you look in the Divrei Mishpat, over here, he also explains like the Nesivos HaMishpat, but he only puts it on the Nimuki Yosef. It doesn't say that that's the shit of the Rashba. This is the shit of the Nimuki Yosef. So you could take the logic of what Nesivos says, the Svar of the Nesivos, that Nesivos says about the Rashba and the Nimuki Yosef, take the Rashba out because the Rashba says fakert, but at least according to the Nimuki Yosef, it still stands. Now, what is the svara over here also? What's the svara of the Rashba? That a person has a right to block somebody from not doing something in his own property when he's not nene from his friend's avir, only because down the line he's going to might have to go to Adon Torah with him. It's hard to say that just that the idea of going to Beis Din is chaser. Even though we said before, it's hard to say the idea of just the Din Torah is enough of a chaser. Because if the idea of a Din Torah is chaser, then the Rosh would also hold that way. The Rosh would hold the same thing. Zayin chaser, the fact you have to go to Din Torah is a chaser. Because the Rosh Svara is an Evzeloi chaser. But if you say that there is a chaser, because of the Din Torah, so he would also be oiseret. The fact is the Rosh is not oiseret, and the Rashba is oiseret. So, Taki, you could say that the Rashba and the Rosh disagree on what the definition of chaser is. Chaser k'tzas. According to the Rosh, the chaser is not a emotional chaser; it's a physical chaser. There's a karka, and by me, I'm being mechaser something from your karka. So therefore, if right now I'm not taking something away from you, I'm not taking a physical thing from you, and we're not going to go with the svara that air is not something, because we already explained in the previous shiurim that air is a mahus. And so you're taking something physical away from him. So there's chaser. So the Rosh says that being that the svara of the Rosh is that chaser is only something which is existing in this world, not something in your own emotion. So therefore, by me doing and causing, taking something from you, I'm being chaser. But if I'm not taking anything from you right now, so you're not being chaser anything. And achas kam v'kam, if I'm doing it in my own property, I'm for sure not being mechaser you or anything. Then even the Mukhi Yosef will be moide. So over there, it's considered a chaser. So therefore, according to the Rosh, you can't be ma'akev him now. Down the line, when there will become a chaser in the gufa karka, then you could block it. But according to the Rashba,
the same thing about basin. Why does the heck say that the Rosh says the basin is not considered a chaser? It is a chaser, but since it's down the line, we don't care about it now. Just like if I know for a fact it's going to be a chaser in the karka in 5 years, it's not a reason they can be ma'akev now. Same thing with basin.
The what?
It's taga chaser. The Rosh agrees, but according to the sheet of the Rosh, if right now it's not a chaser, even if it's going to be a chaser, even if I know for a fact it's going to be a chaser in a few years from now, right now it's not a chaser, so therefore he's allowed to do it, and then we deal with it then. So even if you say basin is a chaser, fine. It's not, we're saying, just like if, when it comes to, let's say, actual chaser in the karka,
yeah.
he says, you still not be.
So why does the Rashba say that the only issue is bedina or bedaina?
Instead of
the Rashba says only bedina or bedaina. The Rashba, because according to the Rashba and according to the Rosh, you're going to brick the window afterwards. There's no machlokes in the Rashba and the Rosh what happens down the line when there's a kriya. Both of them hold you're going to brick the window.
right.
The only difference is that Rashba says I could block you now because I'm going to have to go with you to the Torah. So you can say, according to the Rashba, that the chaser is also an emotional chaser. That the person himself is going to have emotional trauma from going to Adon Torah. Anybody ever went to Adon Torah knows it's emotional trauma. So it's already enough that you can be considered a chaser. We're stressed out about it. So therefore, you could tell him, I'm not interested in having to deal with the emotional trauma of going to Adon Torah with you in a few years from now. So we can sagen that the entire say according to the Rosh and say according to the Rashba is an emotional trauma. The question is, you could be clear for somebody to prevent you from having an emotional trauma or not, and for that, Rabbi Hamna gave a shir last year, on emotional damages. It was last year. Yeah. It's on the YouTube channel. Now, it's important to point out that I mentioned at the beginning that over here we're talking obviously about a churva which is made to be built. B'derech klal, the lashon churva in Gemara is churva which is planned to be rebuilt. But if it's an empty chatzar which is not zoned for building, it's not planned for building, the bala chatzar cannot be ma'akev. Today's day and age, what's the difference in a churva, asur libanas, churva not asur libanas? You could look at the codes. If it's a place, it could be an empty field which is zoned for if a person owns a certain patch of land which the government is not zoned for residential. It's zoned as a park. And the only thing you can do, it's not zoned mamish as a park, but you can't build it for whatever reason it is. So he can't block him from doing it. It's not a surely bonus. But if it's a house which collapsed and it's empty for 5-10 years, but it's zoned for a building, that's a surely bonus. You have properties in Karnas, you could see that they're residential properties, or even commercial. I'm saying it's zoned for the purpose of building. There's a book called Tzrei Kesef to the Talmud of the Rashba, and in Derech Gimel Shar Daled Ois Beis, he writes both times when he quotes the Rashba, he says the chumrah of the Rashba is because mishum that stam churba is asur libanas. That's why he's machmer. I mean, that's the reason why he's machmer in these things. The Mechaber says it's also the das of the Rivash, and the Rivash himself says that many Achronim were maskim to it. What is the Rivash? If you don't have the Rivash by you could just look in the Ktsas Sifkat and Hey. He brings the Rivash, and it doesn't matter, I'm not going to get into the whole discussion, but if you want to see what the Rivash, a summary of the Rivash is in the Ktsas Sifkat and Hey. What does the Rivash say in Shas Shuva Siman Taf Ayin Aleph? The Rivash says that the Rosh writes that being that there's no Hezek Kriya, Therefore, you cannot be moiche, because koif nami does time. And being that you cannot be moiche, you cannot be machzik. The Rivosh says he took the siba, made a mesaiv out of it, and took the mesaiv and made a siba out of it. He says in the Gemara, it seems like the ikr is the chazaka. It means according to the Rosh, the ikr is a mecha. If you can't make a mecha, you can't make a chazaka. He says from the Gemara is verkehrt. If you can't make a chazaka, you can't make a mecha. So he says that he doesn't understand how the Rosh came to such a thing, and the Rivosh asks on the Rosh if the Rivosh holds, as opposed to the Gemara, that the ikar is a mecha, and if you don't have a mecha, you can't make a chazaka. So l'chayr over here there should be an option. Why? Because Baal HaChatzer could come and be mecha every 3 years. Why? So that way, when he's going to build down the line, he's not going to be marchik. So therefore, technically, he could be moich. So if he could be moich every 3 years, the Baal Chaloin could be machzik, because all tali mecha. According to the Rosh, if he could be moich, you could be machzik. So therefore, over here, he could be moich. If he knows he's going to build, he doesn't want to be marchik, he could be moich. So he should be able to do it. Since the chazak is now viable, because you could be moicha, so he could come and he could tell him, I don't want you to build because I don't want to have the bother of being moicha on you every 3 years. And therefore the Rivosh says this whole Yesod of the Rosh is wrong. Therefore it's not that because you could be moicha, you could have a chazaka, because you can't be moicha, you can't have a chazaka. Rather it's based on the chazaka. If you can't make a chazaka, you can't be moicha. If you could make a chazaka, you could be moicha. Therefore he holds that over here you could make a chazaka, and because you could make a chazaka, you could be moicha and you could be me'akev. And the Ktsas explains why he thinks that the Rosh happens to be right in this disagreement. I'm not going to get into it now. The Mechaber says that the same thing is also the shit, the same as the Rivosh, is also the shit of the Ramban, also the shit of Rabbeinu Yoina, and that's how we paskin. Hachin aktinon. So I'm going to get to what does it mean, this is how we paskin. The Ramah adds, whenever there's a minhag, you follow the minhag. Now, he says, the Ramban, what's the shit of the Rabbeinu Yoina? The Rabbeinu Yoina holds that a nizak has a right to be moiche on future hazekas that are going to come to him. And if the person is not moiche on a future hazek, it means that he was moichel, and therefore the other person could be machzik. And therefore, since he could be moichel and he could be machzik, he could be ma'akev on him, and he could be machzik. And that's what seems like the Rivosh and the Rashba and the Rabbeinu Yoina, not the Ramban, all hold that he could be machzik. And the Mechaber says, but the Ramban says you can't be machzik. Even though you could be ma'akev, if you're not ma'akev, the other person is not machzik. So the Ramban is somewhere in the middle. You have the Rivosh, Rashba, and the Rabbeinu Yoina that seems that being, you could be moiche, you could be ma'akev, and if you don't, the other person is machzik. The Ramban says no, you could be moiche, you could be ma'akev, but the other person is still not machzik. Comes a shach and asks a question. Sifkat in Yutches, he brings to the Maharas from the Maharas son that he says that the Maharas son holds. He says that this idea that you could be ma'akev but you can't be machzik is not from the Ramban. He says that it's mashma from the Rivosh, that the Rivosh did not bring that statement from the Ramban. The Rivosh quotes the Ramban as if he's fully supporting him, that you could be ma'akev and you could be moiche. So if you look at what the Rivosh, if you look in the different Mishpat explains the Rivosh, and he says the Rivosh explains the Ramban. How does the Rivosh explain the Ramban? And what does it mean that a person could be? He says that the Ramban holds that it could be machzik. But what does it mean that it could be machzik? That the Ramban holds you could be machzik, but only temporarily. You could be machzik as long as you're not doing any damage. But once you're doing damage, you could block him. So, which means that be'etz, according to the way the Rivosh understands the Ramban, you could be ma'akev him because of the potential hazek down the line. If you're not ma'akev him, the other person could be machzik. But his chazak is only so long as he's not being mazik. The moment he's mazik, the chazak falls apart. and he has to block his window. Because he could say, as long as you were not mazik me, I don't have to be moiche. So therefore you have a chazaka to have a potential, you have a chazaka on me that I'm not worried about the din Torah. That's the most chazaka that you have on me. So you have a chazaka to continue having your window open until I need it. But once I need it, the din Torah, I'm not stressed out about it. I don't have the emotional trauma of the din Torah, I'm not worried about it. Then the time of the din Torah is going to come, I'll deal with you then. But the chazaka you don't have. That's how the Rivosh understands the Ramban. However, the Divrei Mishpat himself brings from the Chidush Ramban and the Gemara that it's the mashma verkehrt. That only in the Zakim Gdoilim, like Kutra and Beis HaKisah, which we're going to learn later in the Shulchan Aruch, that's when you could have this kind of chazakah, temporary chazakah. But in other Nizakim, you could be machzik fully, even if you started the chazakah when you were not actually mazik and another person was not meicha, the chazakah sticks. And therefore the Divrei Mishpat remains in a tzarich iyun. What is the shitta of the Ramban over here? That means the Mechaber says the Ramban says that you could be ma'akev but you can't be machzik. He brings that two places in the Ramban. The way the Rivosh understands the Ramban is that you could be machzik so long as you're not being mazik, and the Ramban from the Chidush Ramban it's mashma that you could be machzik mamish, and the Mechaber says you can't be machzik at all, so he leaves the whole thing in a tzarich iyun. Now the Mechaber says v'hochi naktinon before he brings the Ramban, which means a simple reading of the Mechaber is that you could be ma'akev. If the person is not moicha, you could be machzik. That's a simple understanding of the Mechaber, like the Rashba. Maybe we could say that it's not like the Rashba. It's like the way the Rivosh understands the Ramban, that you could be machzik only temporarily. Or maybe Hochi Naktina is like the Ramban, which the Mechaber brings out afterwards, that you cannot be Bechal Mekeh Chazakeh. Why is that? I'll show you in a second. Because what's the Shoresh of the Suffolk? If you look in the Lashon of the Mechaber over here, in Sif Tazayin, the Mechaber says, Chein das harayved ulzeh hiskim harivosh, v'kosav sheken das harbe ma'achroinim, v'chein das Rabbi Yoina v'Ramban, v'hochi naktinon. And then you have the quote from the Rivosh that the Ramah says. But let's say the Ramah is not there, because the Mechaber did not see the Ramah. So it says, v'chein das Rabbi Yoina v'hochi naktinon, v'miyukosav Ramah shnir eloi, shen yoch la'arzik olav v'in mazik adayin. End of the Sif. So what does the v'hochi naktinon go on? The v'hochi naktinon goes on everything. The v'hochi naktinon goes that you only on the could be moiche, or only on you could be, or that you could also be, or also you could be machzik. So if you look in the Taz later on Sif Chaf Aleph, he says that the Mechaber, who's based himself on the Rambam, holds like the Rashba, that you could be moiche, you could be ma'akev, and if you're not moiche, not ma'akev, the other person made a full chazakah. And the Parmoin is over there also on Sif Chaf Aleph. It's also in the Blue Book. Also, paskins like that the Mechaber holds like the Rashba. But the Maras Hassan, which is quoted in the Shach, he holds that the Mechaber holds like the Ramban. And if you look in the Smeh on Sif Chaf Aleph, he also says that the Mechaber holds like the Ramban, not like the Rashba. What's the problem with that? You have a Pischei Tshuva, Sifkot and Tezvav. It brings in the name of Shas Shus Mayim Chayim, that a person could say Kimli like Rabbi Yoina and the Rivosh, that he has a chazakah, that he's muchzik forever. And he held the way he understood the Rivosh is that the chazakah is forever, right away, etc. And that's how the Mechaber holds. And the problem is, you can't say Kimli against the Mechaber. So if a person says Kimli like the Rivosh and like the Rabbi Yoina, and the Mechaber paskin like the Rivosh and Rabbi Yoina, so Shain, you could say Kimli, it's not a problem. But if you're going to say Kimli and you don't know what the Mechaber holds, how can you say Kimli against the Mechaber? So therefore, that's Mitzad, if you say Mitzad Kimli. So Rekiva Eger avoids this whole problem. He paskins like the Rashba, but not because of Kimli. He says the reason He says it happens to be you pass like the Rashba because the majority of the Raishonim hold like the Rashba. The Ramban, who disagrees on the Rashba, himself has a suffix on it. That's how Rabbi Akiva Eiger explains him. But if it will be only within Kimli, it will be a problem. So therefore, if somebody opens a window to a place which down the line is going to be a Hezek, and the person is not Moiche, maybe Itake does have a Chazaka, or maybe he doesn't have a Chazaka Alter. However, today, we follow, everything is according to Minhag HaMokim. If you open a window, if you buy a property, it's all because you base yourself on the Machus and what each person's rights are. And therefore, the person who bought the property, opened the windows, relying on the Machus. And the person on the other side of the Chatzir understood that it's only being done because of the Machus, and therefore he was not Moiche. So therefore, being that's all based on the Machusa, and that's what they relied on, so it's not because of a Chazakas, there's no Chazakas. Because it's not based on you being not Moiche, because you're not Moiche because based on the Machusa. And I'm opening it because based on the Machusa. So I can't be Machzik, and you can't be Moiche. So well, this whole thing is put on the side if that's how we follow, but that's on the sideline.
Why can't you say Kimli against the Mechaber? It's chaos.
If the Mechaber paskins one way and there's no chelik of the Ramah, you can't say Kimli against the Mechaber. It's Allah Psuka. You can't say, can't come and say Kimli when there's a clear Hachra and the Ramah doesn't disagree on the Mechaber. If the Ramah disagrees on the Mechaber, so you're a Sfardi, you don't have to say Kimli. You're Ashkenazi, you don't have to say Kimli. You follow the Mechaber, the Ramah. But if it becomes a suffix, then the Shaila is if you could say Kimli against the Mechaber. You can't say Kimli when it's a clear halacha one way. Kimli doesn't mean that you search in Eitzel HaChachma and you find one shitta that nobody saw before and you say, well, Kimli like this. Nobody saw it since the 500 years since it was printed and it was only found in the library and was digitized and nobody knows why nobody saw it in the last 500 years. Kimli, it doesn't fly.
Unless most Achrenim
Paskin differently. Yeah.
Without Kimli.
Because most Rishonim anyways hold like he doesn't mention Kimli B'chlal. Akiva Eiger says the reason why we pass like the Ramban is because most Achrenim pass like the most Rishonim pass like the Rashba.
Even if let's say the Mechaber doesn't.
Even if the Mechaber Taka doesn't. We're going to soon see in Even Ezer where you see that everybody passes against the Mechaber. Could you say Kimli against the Mechaber? It's not mixing up the two shurim together. The Ramah continues that even according to Rabbeinu Yoina and the Rivash that you could make a chazak if the other person was not moiche, it's only when you open to Reshus Chavere. But if you open on Avir Reshus Harabim, then the Kuli Alma, the person cannot be moiche. And therefore, since he cannot be moiche, the other person cannot be machzik. And the Smeh explains, what are we talking about? That if you have a Reshus Harabim, which is less than 4 amas wide, and one person opened up windows, and the other person right now is going to go and across the street, he's going to maybe build a wall in his churva, and he's going to block the windows, then he has a right to do it, because since he can't be moiche because over Avir Reshus Harabim, therefore the other person cannot be machzik. This is based on the Rashba, and the reason is, again, because he's not using anything that belongs to his friend. And he's not taking anything away from his friend, he's taking Avir Reshus Harabim, and therefore the other one cannot block him. And since the second one cannot be moiche because of Avir Reshus Harabim, the first one cannot be machzik. And since the Rishon cannot be machzik, so the second one could block the light from his windows. The Sivas HaMishot over here asks a question. If Reshus Harabim is less than 4 amas, and each window, according to Allah, needs 4 amas in front of it, Nimtza comes out that when I open a window, and it's less than only 4 amas between my house and the house across the street, I'm actually stealing 2 amas from the other person. So I am using his avir, because each person has to have 4 amas in front of his window. It's on top of Reshus Harabim, fine, but according to halacha, there's 4 amas clearance for every window. 6 feet. It's about 6 feet, Dal amas. So therefore, I have, if it's only 6 feet within 2 sides of the street, so by me doing, I'm taking 2 amas away from you. My 4 amas that from my window are taking 2 amas from you. So I am mishtamish in your avir. So therefore, you should be able to be moiche. According to the Rashba. So therefore, the Tzivos HaMishpat explains the Rashba that it's talking about 2 specific, in certain scenarios. It gives 2 answers to Farent for the Rashba, the Tzivos over here. And again, over here, by the way, the Tzivos after this says it, he saw the Rashba in brackets, he saw the Rashba, and these 2 terutzim go by the wayside, but still enjoyable to learn the terutzim within the Tzivos. First of all, first teretz in the Tzivos is, we're talking about a churva v'bayis, not a churva v'chotzer. By a churva v'bayis, we're talking about that originally across the street there was a house without any windows. And therefore, the house fell down. So now the person that's across the street is opening windows which are facing the other person's house. And now he has a right to open the window. If it would be before, he would have a right to open the windows. Yeah, it's somewhat of a right. He might be ma'akiv him down the line. It's the question if you be ma'akiv him, how much you be ma'akiv him. But when there's no windows across the street, there's no shayla of hezekriya. So now that the house collapsed, he wasn't zoiche 2 amas of the other person's windows because the other person did not have any windows. He was zoiche 4 amas of hefker. But so he's not using any of his friends' avir. But if it was a churvas chatzir across the street, then he could be ma'akiv. Because when the chatzir is built, the issue of hezekriya, there's no wall blocking it. So when the chatzir collapses, down the line there will be hezekriya. So there is a distance in front of the house, in front of the churva of the chatzir, that when the chatzir exists, there is his own avir over there. So therefore you are taking, so in such a case, you could be ma'akiv. So what the Rashba says, that you can't be ma'akiv when it's across the Rishus Harabim, is only churvas bayis. That's the first teretz of the Nesivos. The second teretz of the Nesivos is, no, the air belongs to Rishus Harabim. Does not belong not to you and not to you. As long as a second person is not doing an act of building on facing the Rishus Harabim, you have full right to use as much air of Rishus Harabim as you want. And he's not taking anything from anybody else. The Avir Rishus Harabim belongs to, well again, we mentioned it in the previous year, or does it belong to each person, everybody shoots from, or does it belong to the king? So here, the second teretz says, no, it belongs to everybody, it belongs to nobody. It's hefker. So if I'm the first one who's opening it, I'm zeichem in a hefker. When the second one is going to want to build, I'm going to anyways have to block my windows because of the shayla of hezekriya. And in square brackets he says, but according to the Rashba, which I already mentioned before, that according to the Rashba, even if I'm not nana anything from my friend, the friend could still be ma'akiv me. This whole explanation is down, doesn't apply anymore, because over here this is all based on whether I am nana from you, I'm not nana from you. The same as the previous Nesivos. But in previous Nesivos he writes in the brackets that afterwards he's on the Rashba, but even when he's not nana, he can still be ma'akiv. So here also, even if he's not nana, he could still be ma'akiv. So the question of the Nesivos still stays. There's no answer to that Nesivos. The Marsham says that it has nothing to do with Nenem Avir Chaveira. What's the reason why the Ramah, or why the Rashba says that when you open onto the Rishus Harabim, the other person can't be ma'akiv, is simply because of Dina de Malchusa. According to Dina de Malchusa, every single person has a right to open his windows to the Rishus Harabim, regardless of whether it's 4 amas or 6 amas or 10 amas or 16 amas wide. So if there is Dina de Malchusa, I can't be moiche against Dina de Malchusa. I can't be moiche. That's the Rashba says. You can't be moiche. You can't be moiche. The other one can't be machzik. So shein. If there's no Dina de Malchusa, taka, you could be moiche. That's what the Marsham explains. And the Marsham concludes that kvar nagu all the batei din to paskin not like the Nesivos HaMishpat. Not like the Nesivos HaMishpat, that therefore means that you cannot be moiche, you cannot be machzik. Now there is a continuation to the Ramah, but the clock is my enemy, and therefore I will stop now, and there'll be another shir at about 5 o'clock on Neven Ezer.